I want to tell you about a Tuesday morning that I will never forget for the rest of my life. I was sitting at a long conference table on the 14th floor. The kind of room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city that nobody actually looks at because everyone is too busy watching whoever is standing at the front. That morning, the man standing at the front was my boss. His name was Derek Calloway, Regional Vice President, hired 18 months earlier from a company in Atlanta that nobody in our industry had ever heard of. Derek was clicking through a slide deck. Clean slides, good fonts, the kind of presentation that looks expensive even when the content is thin. And he was talking about the Northgate logistics deal for $1 million, a contract that had taken 14 months to build from the ground up. The CEO, Frank Okafor, was sitting at the head of the table, nodding slowly. The CFO was smiling. The VP of operations was leaning forward with his arms crossed, which for him meant he was impressed. Everyone in that room was looking at Derek like he had just done something remarkable. I was sitting 3 chairs away from him. I'd been in that building for 19 years. I knew every face at that table. And I sat there completely still while Derek said the words, my strategy and my relationship with the client, and when I first approached Northgate about this opportunity. I did not move. I did not react. I just listened. And then Derek said something that nearly made me laugh out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was so far from the truth that it felt almost impossible. He said, I flew out to meet their procurement team personally. That face-to-face meeting was the turning point. I was the one on that flight. I have a boarding pass saved in my email right now. I sat in seat 14C on a Tuesday morning, flew to Columbus, Ohio, rented a car, drove 40 minutes to Northgate's distribution facility, and sat across the table from Gerald Tate for 3 hours. Derek was at a company retreat in Scottsdale that week. He sent me a text that morning asking how the weather was in Ohio. But nobody in that room knew that. And Derek knew that they didn't know. That is the moment I want you to understand. Not the anger. I did not feel angry sitting in that room. What I felt was something colder and heavier than anger. It was the feeling of watching something be taken from you in front of witnesses, and the witnesses do not even know they're watching a theft. My name is Marcus Hale. I was 47 years old that Tuesday morning. I had spent 19 years in enterprise logistics sales. I had built client relationships that this company depended on. I had closed deals that kept people employed. I had never been the loudest person in the room, and I had never needed to be because the results always spoke for me. Until that morning. That morning, the results were speaking for someone else. I watched Frank Okafor write something down on his notepad. I watched the CFO lean over and say something quietly to the woman next to him. I watched Derek stand at the front of that room, calm and polished and completely comfortable, talking about 14 months of my work as though he had lived every minute of it himself. I picked up my coffee cup. I took a slow sip. I set it back down. Nobody looked at me. I thought about my daughter, who was finishing her last year of college. I thought about my wife, Linda, who had been working part-time since her health scare 2 years back. I thought about the mortgage and the way the last few years had felt like running on a treadmill that kept getting a little faster every month. And I thought, I need to be very careful about what I do next. By Friday of that same week, the truth had reached the CEO. Not from me, from the client. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you who I am, because it matters to this story. I started at Trident Supply Solutions when I was 28 years old. Entry-level field sales. I was driving a used Honda and eating lunch at my desk most days because I could not afford to eat out. I did not have an MBA. I did not have a mentor on the executive floor. What I had was a willingness to learn the business from the ground up and a habit of doing exactly what I said I was going to do. Over 19 years, that turned into something real. I worked my way up to Senior Enterprise Account Director. Sounds impressive. The pay could have been better, but the title was real, and more importantly, the relationships were real. The most important one was Gerald Tate. Gerald was the Vice President of Procurement at Northgate Logistics. I had known him for 11 years. We were not close friends. We were something more useful than that. We trusted each other professionally. When Northgate had a delivery failure 2 years ago that cost them real money, Gerald called me directly at 7 in the morning. Not the company hotline. My personal cell. I spent the next 2 days fixing that problem. I did not bill extra hours. I did not ask for credit. I just fixed it because that is what you do when someone trusts you. That kind of trust is not something a company owns. You cannot put it in a slide deck. It lives in the history between two people who have shown up for each other over time. Derek Calloway had none of that history. I want to be fair about Derek. He was not a stupid man. He was sharp, actually. He dressed well. He spoke in the kind of measured, confident sentences that make executives feel comfortable. He had an MBA from a school he managed to mention within the first 10 minutes of almost every conversation. He knew how to read a room. He knew how to make the people above him feel smart and informed. What he did not know was the actual work. He had never sat across the table from a procurement director for 3 hours working through fulfillment timelines. He had never driven to a client's warehouse in February to walk the floor and understand their specific bottlenecks. He did not know the difference between a 3PL contract and a dedicated carrier agreement in a way that someone knows it when they have lived it for years. He was good at the performance of the job. I was good at the job itself. I had underestimated how dangerous that gap was. In most companies, results protect you. I had always believed that. Do the work, close the deals, serve the clients, and the results will speak for you. For 19 years, that had been true enough to keep me comfortable. What I had not fully understood was this. Results only protect you if the right people know who produce them. Derek understood that, maybe better than anyone I had ever worked with. And I was about to find out exactly what that understanding could cost me. Let me tell you exactly how the Northgate deal was built. Because if you're going to understand what was taken from me, you need to understand what it actually cost to build it. Northgate Logistics had been a mid-level account for us for years. Solid, but not spectacular. They were a regional distribution company out of Ohio, mid-size, steady, the kind of client that pays on time and does not cause problems. I managed the relationship the same way I managed all my accounts. Consistently, quietly, without a lot of fanfare. Then about 14 months before that Tuesday boardroom meeting, Gerald Tate called me on a Thursday afternoon. Not an email, a phone call. He said, "Marcus, we're about to do something big. And I want to make sure we do it with the right partner." Northgate was expanding. They were building out a regional distribution network across 4 states: Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. They needed a logistics partner who could scale with them, handle the complexity, and do it without the kind of service failures that had hurt them in the past. Gerald said he had looked at 3 other vendors. He was calling me first because he wanted to give me a real shot before the process got formal. I said, "Give me 3 weeks." I spent the next 3 months doing the work. I drove to Northgate's main facility in Columbus twice to walk the floor and understand their operation from the inside. I talked to their warehouse managers. I mapped their current pain points. I brought in 2 contacts from my own professional network, people I had worked with for years, to help me build a fulfillment pricing model that was both competitive and realistic. I did not cut corners to win the number. I built the number to win the relationship. Derek Calloway was aware the proposal was in progress. I had told him in our weekly check-in. He said, "Sounds good, keep me posted." That was the extent of his involvement. When it was time for the formal procurement meeting, I flew to Columbus alone. Derek was in Scottsdale at a company leadership retreat. I sat in front of Gerald and 3 members of his team for nearly 3 hours. I walked them through every page of the proposal. I answered every question. When they pushed back on the fulfillment timeline for the Tennessee corridor, I did not flinch. I had anticipated that question. I had the answer ready. The meeting ended with handshakes and the kind of quiet that tells you something good is about to happen. The final contract negotiation took another 2 weeks. Back and forth emails, calls, small adjustments to the service terms. All of it was done through my work account, documented in our company's CRM system exactly the way our process required. My name on every thread. My proposals attached to every file. My call logs recorded against the account. The contract was signed on a Thursday afternoon in late October. I was sitting in my car in the Northgate parking lot when Gerald called. I had stopped in to drop off the final signed copy in person because that is the kind of thing I believed in doing. He called as I was pulling out of the lot. He said, "Marcus, you earned this one." I drove home that evening with the windows down, even though it was cold. I told Linda when I walked in the door. She put her hand over her mouth for a second, and then she smiled, and then she cried just a little. We had a quiet dinner. We did not go anywhere special. We just sat at our own kitchen table and let it feel like enough. I filed the full deal in the company CRM that same night. Every document, every email thread, every call log, time-stamped and attached. Everything that proved the truth was already sitting inside the company's own system. Derek just assumed no one would ever go looking. I went back to my desk after the boardroom presentation, and I said nothing. I sat down, opened my laptop, and pulled up my email. I responded to 2 client messages that had come in that morning. I reviewed a proposal for a smaller account I was working on. I did the ordinary work of an ordinary Tuesday, while 3 floors below the executive suite, my name was being added to nobody's conversation. By that afternoon, I saw the internal email. It came from Frank Okafor's office. The subject line was Northgate Partnership, a win for Trident. It was 3 paragraphs long. It talked about the strength of the deal, the size of the contract, and what it meant for the company's growth in the Midwest region. It praised Derek Calloway specifically. It called his work a strong example of executive-level client development. My name was not in it. I read the email twice. Then I checked the CC list to see if maybe I had been included in a separate message. I had not. I closed the email and stared at my screen for a long moment. I want to be honest about what that felt like. It was not loud. There was no sudden rage, no urge to stand up and say something. It was quieter than that. It felt like being walked past, like standing at the side of a road and watching a parade go by that you helped plan, while someone else waved from the float. I considered going to HR. I thought about it seriously for about 2 days, but I had been at this company long enough to know how that conversation ends. A middle-aged man goes to HR and says he did not get enough credit for something. HR listens carefully. HR says they will look into it. And then, quietly, that man becomes the man who complained. That label follows you. It sits on you in every meeting after that. I had seen it happen to other people, and I was not willing to become that story. I also thought about going to Frank directly, but the same problem applied. Without something concrete, it was my word against Derek's narrative, and Derek's narrative had already been confirmed by the CEO's own email. So I waited. On Wednesday morning, 2 days after the boardroom meeting, Derek called me into his office. He was relaxed, friendly even. He offered me coffee, which he had never done before. He sat on the edge of his desk instead of behind it, which he did when he wanted to seem casual. He told me that going forward, all communication related to the Northgate account should be routed through his office. For consistency, he said. So we are presenting one unified face to the client. I asked him what that meant for my direct relationship with Gerald Tate. He looked at me with a calm, patient expression and said, "Gerald is a company client now, Marcus, not a personal contact." I nodded. I said I understood. I walked back to my desk. That night, I sat in my garage after dinner with the light off. I was not dramatic about it. I was just sitting in a dark room, being honest with myself about what was actually happening. Linda came out after a while and stood in the doorway and asked if I was okay. I told her yes. She stood there another moment, then went back inside. She knew me well enough not to push. Derek was not just taking credit. He was building a wall between me and the account so that the credit would stick permanently. He was rewriting the story before anyone thought to question the first draft. That was when something shifted in me. I stopped thinking about how to protect myself inside the system. I started thinking about what the system actually knew and who else might want to know it. On Thursday morning, my personal cell phone buzzed on my desk. I looked at the screen. It was Gerald Tate. I let it ring through to voicemail. Not because I did not want to talk to him, because I needed to think before I did. Gerald's voicemail was short. He said he had seen the newsletter piece Trident had published about the Northgate partnership. It was a short article in our industry trade publication, the kind of thing the marketing team put out whenever we closed something significant. A few paragraphs about the deal, what it meant for both companies, and a quote from Derek Calloway describing himself as the architect of the partnership. Gerald said he just wanted to make sure I was being recognized for the work. He said, "Marcus, this was your deal. Call me." I sat with that voicemail for a long time. I understood what Gerald was offering. He was offering loyalty. 11 years of it, coming through clearly in a 30-second message. And I was grateful for it. But I also understood something that Gerald probably did not. That loyalty, used wrong in a corporate environment, can be neutralized. If I called Gerald back immediately and said Derek is taking credit for my work, that becomes a complaint routed through a client. Derek's people manage the response. It gets framed as a miscommunication. It gets minimized. It gets buried. And I become the employee who used a client relationship to fight an internal political battle, which is exactly the kind of thing that gets a person managed out quietly. I was not going to let that happen. So instead of calling Gerald back, I did something else. I opened the company CRM system and I started pulling documents. Not randomly, carefully and completely. I exported every file attached to the Northgate account. The original proposal drafts, all 3 versions. The pricing model with my name in the document properties. My travel records showing the 2 trips to Columbus. Every email thread, sorted by date. The signed contract with the timestamp and the cover letter I had written. The call log showing dozens of conversations between me and Gerald's team going back 14 months. I converted everything to PDF. I organized it into folders by category. And I saved it all to a personal encrypted drive that had nothing to do with company servers. I was not planning revenge. I want to be clear about that. I was planning truth. I was making sure that if someone eventually decided to look, the looking would not be difficult. That evening, I called my brother-in-law, Ray. Ray is a contract attorney. He has been practicing for over 20 years, mostly commercial disputes, the kind of work that involves reading agreements very carefully and understanding exactly what they mean and do not mean. I did not call him to file anything. I called him to understand my position. I explained the situation. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said one sentence. He said, "If they try to push you out over this, the paper trail is your entire case." I wrote that down, not because I needed to remember it, because writing it down made it feel real and solid in a way that just hearing it did not. I slept better that night than I had all week. Friday morning, I called Gerald back. I made myself a cup of coffee first. I sat down at the kitchen table before Linda was up. The house was quiet, and I called him back, and I listened to what he had to say. Gerald picked up on the second ring. He did not sound angry. Gerald Tate was not an angry man by nature. He was the kind of person who had spent decades in procurement, which means he had spent decades making clear-headed decisions under pressure without letting his emotions drive the outcome. When he spoke, he was calm and direct, the way people are when they have already decided what they think, and they just need to say it plainly. He told me that earlier in the week, he had received a call from Derek Calloway. Derek had introduced himself as the lead executive on the Northgate partnership. He had called to introduce himself formally and to propose scheduling a quarterly business review for the new year. Gerald said the call was professional enough on the surface, but something about it felt off from the beginning. Gerald asked Derek a few basic questions, the kind of questions you ask when you want to understand who you are actually dealing with. He asked about the fulfillment timeline for the Tennessee corridor, the one I had negotiated specifically because Northgate's expansion, there was the most complex part of the whole agreement. Derek gave him a number that was wrong. Not slightly off, genuinely wrong, in a way that would have created real problems if it had gone uncorrected. Gerald also mentioned that Derek mispronounced the name of Northgate's regional director in Kentucky, a man named Paul Schreier, which is pronounced Schreier, not Schreier. It is a small thing, but Gerald noticed it. In his world, not knowing the name of the person you are supposedly managing a relationship with is a signal. After the call, Gerald had his assistant pull the original proposal documents from the Northgate file. His name was not on them. Mine was. On every page. In the document headers, in the cover letter, in the pricing model, in the project timeline. 14 months of work with my name attached to all of it, sitting in Gerald's own files. He told me all of this without editorializing. He just laid out the facts the way a good procurement man lays out facts, clearly and in order. Then he said, "Marcus, I am not comfortable with this transition. You built this. You know our operation. You know our people. I want to know if you're still going to be our point of contact going forward." I was careful with my answer. I did not say anything negative about Derek. I did not describe what had happened internally. I simply told Gerald the truth as I could safely tell it, that I was still with the company, that I was fully committed to the Northgate relationship, and that I was working through some internal alignment that I expected to resolve shortly. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to send a short note to your CEO. I just want to make sure the right people are being recognized for the right work. I hope that is okay with you." I told him I appreciated it. We said goodbye, and I hung up the phone. I sat at my kitchen table, and I did not move for a few minutes. I had not asked Gerald to do that. I had not steered the conversation toward it, had not hinted at it, had not suggested it in any form. Gerald Tate had arrived at that decision entirely on his own, because that is the kind of man he was, someone who believed that credit should go where the work went, and who had the standing to say so in a way that would be heard. In a few hours, Gerald Tate was going to send an email to Frank Okafor. I had not pushed the truth. I had simply stopped standing in front of it, and now it was going to move on its own. I did not find out what happened Friday afternoon all at once. I found out the way you find out most things in a company that has been around long enough to have real hallways and real people in them, in pieces from someone you trust, told quietly and without drama. Her name was Anita Marsh. She had been Frank Okafor's executive assistant for 11 years. She was not a gossip. She was not someone who traded information for social currency. But she and I had known each other since she started, and over the years we had built the kind of quiet professional friendship that does not require much maintenance because it is built on mutual respect. She called my desk phone at 4:50 on Friday afternoon. She said, "Marcus, I just want you to know that today was a significant day. I think things are going to look different for you next week." She did not say anything else. She did not need to. I later pieced together the rest for what she told me over the following days. Gerald's email had arrived at Frank Okafor's inbox sometime around noon on Friday. It was not long. Gerald was not the kind of man who wrote long emails. But what it said was clear, and it was professional, and it was the kind of message that a CEO cannot read without feeling something shift under his feet. Gerald had written to thank Trident for the Northgate partnership. He said the deal represented a significant commitment on Northgate's part and that they were excited about the growth ahead. And then he said that he wanted to take a moment to specifically recognize Marcus Hale, who had built the relationship with Northgate over many years and had personally designed and delivered the proposal that made the partnership possible. He described my work as thorough, trustworthy, and deeply knowledgeable about Northgate's specific operational needs. He said that the years of reliability I had shown were the primary reason Northgate had chosen Trident over 3 competing bids. And then, politely and without accusation, he mentioned that he had been surprised to see a different name credited in Trident's public announcement. He said he simply wanted to make sure that internal recognition reflected the actual work, and that he looked forward to continuing the relationship with the team that had earned Northgate's trust. Frank Okafor read that email and then went into the company CRM himself. He saw everything, every file I had attached to the Northgate account, every email thread, every proposal draft, every travel record, every call log, all of it time-stamped, all of it under my name. 14 months of documented work sitting exactly where I had put it, untouched and complete. He then looked at the internal announcement his office had sent out praising Derek's leadership on the deal. Derek was called into Frank's office sometime around 3 o'clock that afternoon. I do not know exactly what was said in that room. I was not there and I did not ask. But I know that the meeting lasted less than 30 minutes, and I know that by the end of the business day, Derek Calloway had been formally removed from the Northgate account. Monday morning, I came in and found a calendar invitation waiting for me. It was from Frank Okafor's assistant. One-on-one meeting. Tuesday at 9 in the morning. No agenda listed. That weekend was one of the strangest of my life. Not because I was celebrating. I was not celebrating. I mowed the lawn on Saturday morning. I took Linda to a quiet dinner on Saturday night at a place we had been going to for years. I slept a full 8 hours both nights, which I had not done in weeks. It was not triumph I felt. It was something simpler than that. The truth was visible now. The people who needed to see it had seen it. And whatever came next, I had not manufactured it. I had simply refused to let the truth stay buried. Frank Okafor's office was on the 14th floor, the same floor as the boardroom where my name had disappeared the week before. I arrived at 8:55. His assistant showed me in at exactly 9. Frank was already seated. He did not have his phone in his hand, which I noticed because Frank almost always had his phone in his hand. He gestured to the chair across from him and waited until I sat down before he spoke. He said, "Marcus, I owe you an apology. Not a preamble, not a setup, just that directly." He told me that what had happened with the Northgate announcement was wrong. He said it should have been caught before it went out, and that the failure to catch it started with him, because he had not asked the basic questions about who had actually done the work before he allowed his office to put Derek's name on it publicly. He said he was sorry. He said it the way a man says it when he means it, without a lot of extra words around it. Then he told me what was going to change. Effective immediately, I was being formally designated as the senior account executive for Northgate Logistics. My role would be restructured to reflect that designation, and my compensation would be adjusted to include a proper commission on the Northgate deal. The number he gave me was significant. I'm not going to put an exact figure on it here, but I'll tell you it was the kind of number that changes the pressure in a household. The kind that means Linda does not have to watch the part-time hours as carefully. The kind that means my daughter's last year of school is not something I lie awake worrying about. Frank also told me that Derek was being reassigned. He was moving to an internal operations role in a different division. No client-facing responsibilities, no account management, no external visibility. Frank did not frame it as punishment. He framed it as a structural correction, but we both understood what it was. I shook Frank's hand when I left. I thanked him for his honesty. I meant it. I went back to my desk, sat down, and called Gerald Tate. I told him the transition was official, that I was formally back as the point of contact on the Northgate account. Gerald said, "Good. That is how it should have been." We talked for about 10 minutes about the Q1 business review and what Northgate needed coming into the new year. It was a normal professional conversation between two people who had been working together for 11 years. It felt exactly like it should have felt all along. I have thought a lot about what that whole experience taught me. The most important thing is this. I had always believed that doing good work was enough, that if you showed up, did the job right, and built real relationships, the truth would take care of itself. And for most of my career, that had been close enough to true. But what I learned that week is that the truth does not take care of itself automatically. It needs to be documented. It needs to be visible. Not loud, visible. There's a difference. Loud is complaining. Visible is having your name on every file, your call logs in the system, and your work attached to the account where anyone with access can find it. The most dangerous thing I ever did was assume the right people were already paying attention. 3 weeks after that Tuesday morning, I sat in the bleachers at my daughter's graduation. Linda was next to me. The sun was out. When they called our daughter's name and she walked across that stage, I felt something settle in my chest that had been loose for a long time. Not pride exactly. Something quieter than that. A sense that I had not disappeared. That I had stayed and done the work and let the truth find its own way to the surface. If they do not see your value, find a way to make the truth visible. Not loud, just visible.